On Wednesday afternoon, we took a long loop into a mountainous coastal area on the southwest side of Ambon Island. After a stop at a sago farm, which deserves its own post later, we drove on to Naku, a village I have wanted to visit for a long time. Naku is a hillside village perched high above the ocean, beautifully maintained, with a large church at one end and then a long street running down towards the home of the community's cultural leader. It is one of several mountaintop villages in this area settled by the Portuguese in the 16th century. I first came across Naku years ago while doing research for my book on the UIJC, the Jews of Indonesia. One informant shared the story of a co-worker whose father kept old books in what she assumed was Hebrew. She said the script was identical to the Hebrew of my informant's Siddur, and this was locked away in a family cabinet which was passed down for generations. Her family, she said, came from Naku, a strong Portuguese community, many of whose families descend from names like Da Costa and Pereira, names that keep surfacing across Indonesia and elsewhere, where converso ancestry is claimed. I noted at the time that Naku's annual festival still features dancers wearing stylized Portuguese war helmets. I had long hoped to visit Naku, but never expected to see the helmets, let alone the Hebrew book. Let me turn to conversos for a short bit. Secret Jews, conversos, were forced into Christianity in Spain and Portugal in the 15th century, many of whom, or some of whom, kept Jewish life alive underneath. This has been, however, debated by historians for generations, and scholars still disagree about how many really did remain Jewish. But practices that survived, most likely across 500 years, weren't usually Hebrew prayers or books. These needed a community to sustain them, and secrecy wouldn't allow that. What usually survived, when anything did, were a handful of small, simple things a single family or community could quietly keep doing without ever having to explain why. While we didn't find the books in Naku, we did find very interesting things. The culture leader, Anton Urella, himself led us through the village, past murals, playing children, chickens running loose, homes kept with real care. One mural in particular intrigued me, a man painted wearing a Portuguese helmet. There on a village wall, hundreds of years after the Portuguese colony was conquered by the Dutch. On a separate weathered wall elsewhere in the village, faded but unmistakable, someone had painted a six-pointed Star of David in blue. I don't know who painted it, or when, or what they meant by it. I only know it was there. At the end of the road, in the culture leader's own house, we found the regalia for Naku's traditional Chakalela dance. This is a war dance. These included a shield, a spear, and what he claimed were two genuine 16th century Portuguese helmets, metal riveted with long trailing black feathers and red cloth. He also gave me a photograph of the dance itself and told me that other dancers in the same performance wear helmets too, though theirs are woven from local palm and sago leaves rather than made of metal. And he told us that Naku is the only village on Ambon that performs these dances with helmets, whether woven or metal. And as far as I can tell from what I've been able to check, that's correct for Ambon itself. I have learned, though, that further south on Banda Island in the archipelago, it has its own tradition of helmeted Chakalela dancers, which is quite independent of Naku's. But there too, there are two helmets, which are reserved for two specific commander figures rather than worn more broadly. And they're topped with bird of paradise crests, rather than the black feathers and red cloth I saw in Naku. Two villages, apparently unconnected, each keeping its own version of a Portuguese helmet alive inside its traditional dance. These dancers are shaped by hundreds of years of local memory into two genuinely different objects. We talked with another villager about the Naku church, which is Protestant and named Salum. He told us it means peace, and it was suggested that the name may derive from the Hebrew shalom. The original building, he said, had no cross on it at all and closely resembled the church in nearby Soya. We visited that church later the same drive, and it was exactly as he described. The building has a unique rounded design with a rooster wind vane, but no cross on the outside. Inside, where the pulpit and altar stand, there also is no cross. Though on the altar, there was a small wooden one resting on a draped tablecloth, almost as an afterthought. If Naku's own church really did look like this before it was rebuilt, that's a striking detail. These are at least two Protestant churches built deliberately or not, without one symbol that you'd expect to find front and center on the building. Salum, or Shalom, as the Hebrew name for the Ambonese Protestant church, isn't an isolated case. Over the years, I've noticed that many churches on Ambon create Hebrew or Hebrew-derived names, such as Elohim, Gidon, Shekhinah, Peniel, Emmanuel, Exodus, Menachem, El Shaddai, Bethel, and Jewish imagery shows up in other unexpected places too. Menorahs painted into church murals, shofars worked into steeple design, and at Christmas we saw 6-pointed stars of David, which may have been chosen deliberately over their far more common 5-pointed stars. These also appeared on posts in Ambon, along with what appeared to be stars of David. None of this was found when the same kind of informal surveys were done on Manado, Papua, or elsewhere in Indonesia. It's something specific to Ambon and Maluku Islands, not a generic feature of Indonesian Christianity. Several informants unconnected to the Jewish community here have offered their own explanation. They suggested that there is a widespread local belief that the indigenous people of the Maluku Islands are descended from God, one of the ancient tribes of Israel. Be that as it may, Salom as Shalom's name then isn't an outlier. It's one instance of a pattern that runs through churches all across this island. Taken on their own, none of these things proves anything. We experienced 2 helmets in a regalia closet and heard a story about old secret Jewish books which have not been seen by outsiders. We saw a faded star painted on a wall by someone whose name and reasons are both lost to us now. And we saw a church with a name that might derive from Shalom, and we're told it once was a building without a cross. Any single one of these could be a coincidence, or even all. They could be folklore or simply the ordinary residue of 4 centuries old Portuguese presence with no Jewish content at all. But these different kinds of evidence, independently arrived at, all pointing in the same direction, in the same hillside village, that's no longer nothing. It's not proof, and it may never be proof, but it is unmistakably a place worth taking seriously, and I'm very glad that we're finally able to visit it.